There are stories that never find their way into official history. They exist in the shadows, whispering between cold stone walls, passed down only through vague accounts and hidden signs. Among them lies a secret that medieval dynasties were willing to bury, trading both blood and lives to keep it hidden. From the outside, the castles of that age were symbols of power and permanence. Towering walls, heavy iron gates, watchtowers standing silent and still. But within, beneath the gilded halls and marble chambers, there were rooms where light rarely touched. Places that held hushed conversations, sworn oaths, and decisions that could alter the fate of an entire lineage. They called it pure blood. Not the purity of the soul, but of lineage. Kings, queens, and nobles believed their authority flowed from the blood in their veins. A blood they claimed was unlike that of their subjects. And to keep it from becoming tainted, they engaged in marriages that today would be known as incestuous. These unions were never born from love. They were political calculations, links in a chain of power, knots that no one was allowed to untie. A brother marrying his sister, a niece wed to her uncle. Cousins bound together in holy matrimonial, done in the name of protecting the throne. Outsiders were never meant to know. If rumors arose, they were swiftly silenced with gold or by far harsher means. Even the church, the dominant moral authority of the time, could be persuaded or compelled to look away. But no secret, no matter how deep it is buried, leaves no trace. In these families, the marks were written on the faces of their children, clouded eyes, frail limbs, stunted minds, or mysterious illnesses that claimed lives before adulthood. Instead of admitting the truth, they built a flawless facade. Children who died young were said to have succumbed to fevers or plague. The weak or deformed were sent to distant monasteries, disappearing from public sight. And when history was written, it spoke only of beauty and majesty, erasing the darkness behind the throne. The long corridors of ancient castles still stand silent, lined with portraits whose colors have faded with time. In the flicker of candlelight, one might notice something unsettling. Eyes that look strikingly alike across generations. The same cold gaze, the same sharp cheekbones, the same hue of hair. It is no coincidence. It is the mark of blood kept within the same walls. Bound by marriages no one dares speak of aloud today. To understand the full story, one must return to the moment of one of the most infamous royal incestuous weddings, celebration that rang with the sound of trumpets and laughter, yet marked the beginning of a tragedy that would haunt generations. That day, the entire kingdom seemed to turn its gaze toward the castle. Church bells rang from early morning, the sound of trumpets and drums resounding through the streets. People lined the cobblestone road leading to the great gate, eager for a glimpse of what they believed to be a testament to the dynasty's strength. On the surface, everything was resplendent and magnificent. The family banners fluttered from the towers, red and gold ribbons draped across the corridors. A gilded carriage rolled slowly, carrying the bride in a gown of pure white, her face hidden behind a delicate veil. The groom, cloaked in black velvet, embroidered with silver, walked between two rows of guards as cheers filled the air. But behind the curtain of grandeur lay truth far different from what the people imagined. The bride and groom were bound not only by vows but by bloodkin, whose relationship was kept behind stone walls, known only to the most powerful. They were not joined for love, but for a single reason: to keep the so-called pure blood untouched. Inside the grand hall, the ceremony unfolded beneath the glow of hundreds of candles. The air was thick with incense, and the low hum of sacred hymns filled the space. The priest stood high upon the dais, his voice steady and solemn, as he pronounced the blessings, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of hesitation. The vows spoken were not to unite to hearts, but to continue a legacy that had endured for generations. The guests, lords, nobles, and emissaries from far lands sat along the length of a great banquet table. Smiles and toasts filled the air, but not all were without suspicion. There were glances exchanged in silence, whispers so faint they barely escaped the lips. Yet no one dared to speak the truth aloud. Everything had been decided long before. When night fell, fireworks lit up the sky. From beyond the castle walls, it was a moment of joy, a promise of a bright future. But within, the cold stone walls bore witness to another reality. This was not merely the beginning of a marriage, but the forging of a new link in a chain that had bound the family for centuries. No one beyond those walls knew that the happiness of this day would lead to consequences beyond imagining. And only a few years later, the first signs of tragedy would begin to appear quietly, subtly, yet dark enough to cast a shadow over an entire dynasty. In the early years after the wedding, the court still wore its mask of splendor. Banquets stretched long into the night, grand hunting parties filled the forests, and music and wine seemed endless. Yet beneath that brilliance, something else was taking root, creeping silently through every vein. The first child was born in the grip of a harsh winter. Its cry was weak, as if life itself had been drained before its eyes had opened. Swaddled in silk and velvet, the child's frame remained, frail, its skin pale, and its eyes. Those eyes bore the same gaze as the ancestral portraits in the great hall of cold. Deep and shadowed look. Other children followed. Not all were fragile, yet many carried strange marks, trembling hands, unsteady steps, fevers that lingered, without reason. Physicians were summoned, but they only bowed their heads in silence, prescribing remedies that never healed. Beyond the castle walls, the people still believed the royal blood was blessed. But within the cold stone corridors, whispers began to spread. Servants murmured that their blood had been bound for too long, that the royal practice of marrying kin had sown a curse into the dynasty. On certain nights, the thin cries of children echoed down the halls, blending with the wind that hissed through the windows. Flickering candlelight danced over pale faces, their deep-set eyes holding a secret no one dared to speak aloud. And when the eldest heir, the hope of the realm, began to show the first signs of decline, everyone understood that the tragedy had only just begun. The rooms where princes and princesses were born were always hidden deep within the palace. Candles burned through the night, yet their light never chased away the chill that clung to the stone walls. The lullabies of wet nurses whispered softly, but the silence that filled the corridors was far heavier than their song. Not every child born was presented to the kingdom. Some cradles were shrouded by thick curtains, hiding the sound of fragile breathing, or, at times, nothing at all. These children often vanished within weeks, sometimes overnight. The court held no funerals, and their names were never entered into the royal genealogy. Instead, a small casket would be hurried into the crypt without procession. Without prayer, old servants whispered that they had once glimpsed the eyes of such children, eyes that were both familiar and unsettling. They bore the unmistakable features of their royal parents, yet carried a fragility that felt almost tragic. Such whispers were quickly silenced. Those who spoke too much were reassigned far away or disappeared entirely. rumors began to circulate among the nobility. The royal blood was poisoning itself, but in public, the court still dazzled with banquets and grand ceremonies, ensuring the people believed all was well. No one dared speak the truth aloud, for a single word could cost a life, and so, the shadows in the nursery remained, awaiting the next child to be born, carrying a legacy that could not be escaped. The royal physicians moved like ghosts through the palace corridors, summoned at odd hours, their footsteps muffled by thick carpets. They carried leather satchels filled with silver instruments, herbs wrapped in cloth, and vials of bitter-smelling tinctures to the court. They were healers, but in the dim candlelight of the private chambers, they became silent witnesses. They knew the patterns to whelp children who could not lift their heads, who struggled to feed, whose eyes wandered, as if looking at a world beyond reach. Some physicians tried to speak. In carefully worded reports, they hinted that these children might still live if given care and patience. But those reports never left the royal archives. A few doctors who pressed too hard were dismissed, their reputations quietly ruined. Instead, the official diagnoses were vague, feeble from birth, touched by weakness, not long for this world. Such words made it easier for the court to let go. And so the physicians learned to say less, to avert their gaze when they recognized the signs, and to carry out their duties without question. Behind closed doors, they performed small mercies, placing a warmer blanket over a tiny body, slipping an extra drop of honey into a child's milk, lingering a moment longer by the cradle. But they knew such kindness could not rewrite the fate chosen for these children. In the heart of the royal palace, medicine had its limits not of skill, but of permission, and the physicians understood that the unspoken truth could never be written in ink. The queen never spoke of them when a child was born and declared unfit. She followed the rituals as if they were a duty carved in stone. She sat through the blessing, accepted the physician's bowed head, and signed her name on the documents without hesitation. Yet her eyes betrayed her. In the first days, she would watch the child as though memorizing every feature, the curve of a cheek, the faint dimple in the chin. She rarely touched them, but when she did, her hand lingered. At night, the palace corridors would be silent except for the sound of her footsteps. Servants whispered that she walked to the nursery, though she always returned alone. The next morning, her expression was the same as ever, regal, untouchable, unreadable. No one dared to question her silence. In court, a queen's grief was not a private matter. It was a political weapon, one that could not be shown unless it served a purpose. And in this case, her sorrow had no place in the affairs of state. The children's names disappeared from the records. Their rooms were repurposed, their cradles carried away before the week was out. Only the queen carried the memory, locked deep inside, behind eyes that never told the full story. It was said that in her private chapel, she prayed for them, but no one ever heard the words. They were buried quietly. No royal procession, no bells from the cathedral, no mourning clothes for the court to wear. Only a small handful of attendants, a priest who read the rites in a voice meant not to carry, and a coffin too small for the grandeur of the dynasty. The grave was often outside the consecrated grounds, sometimes in a garden, sometimes beyond the palace walls, where no marble marker would betray its place. In time, grass would grow over it, and the earth would forget. But the soil was not the only one to keep the secret. Those who attended the burial never spoke of it again. Even the priest was bound by a silence heavier than any oath. A misplaced word could invite the wrath of the crown or worse. The disgrace of the church for admitting what had been done. The absence of a name meant the child had never truly existed in the eyes of the realm. No title, no place in the line of succession, no record in the archives. Only in the hearts of those few who had seen them would their memory live. Fading slowly until it became a whisper, then nothing. Some said the wind over the palace gardens carried a strange sound at night, like a lullaby sung without words, but no one listened for long. In the royal court, certain truths were not meant to be heard. Not every story ends with justice. The royal children born with Down syndrome may never receive statues or state funerals. Their names, in many cases, are gone forever buried, deeper than their unmarked graves. History, as it is written, will pass them by without a word. But that does not mean they never lived. Somewhere, there was a hand that once held theirs. Somewhere, there was laughter in a nursery before the silence came. Somewhere, there were tears shed in private chambers when no one was watching. These moments, unseen and unrecorded, are still part of the truth. To remember them is to defy the silence that was built around their existence. It is to say that their lives mattered, even when the world decided they did not. In the end, perhaps the greatest act of justice we can offer is not in monuments of stone, but in the act of telling their story out loud, where no one can erase it again, because as long as someone remembers, they were never truly forgotten. Thank you for spending your time with Prehistoric. History is not just battles and crowns, it's the whispers, the secrets, and the forgotten truths that still echo in the dark. If tonight's journey kept you listening until the end, consider subscribing, leaving a like, and sharing this story so others can hear it too. Until next time, sleep well, and let the past keep whispering.